If you find yourself stranded without electricity, without refrigeration, and without modern conveniences, would you know how to preserve food for months? Would you know how to turn simple ingredients into life-saving medicine? Get comfortable, grab your favorite pillow, and settle in for another soothing tale from history. Welcome to Dozing Documentarian, where we explore the gentle art of medieval survival. Today we're taking a peaceful journey into the quiet world of our ancestors, those calm, simple folk who definitely never had to worry about anything as dramatic as, starving to death, freezing in winter, or watching their food turn into deadly poison. Yes, just a relaxing story about medieval people and their absolutely fascinating methods for cheating death itself. Let's start with something you probably have in your kitchen right now: salt. But medieval people didn't just season their food with it. They used it to literally cheat death. Salt was so valuable in medieval times that it was called white gold, and for good reason. The medieval salting technique wasn't just sprinkling salt on meat. They had a sophisticated method that modern preppers are rediscovering. They would press dry salt deep into pieces of meat, then layer these pieces in wooden kegs, completely surrounding each piece with more salt. This created an environment where harmful bacteria couldn't survive. But here's what's fascinating. They combined salt with other preservation methods. They understood that salt alone wasn't enough. They would salt meat, then smoke it, then dry it. This triple threat approach could preserve meat for months, even years. A technique so effective that some medieval preserved meats have been found in archaeological sites, still intact after 500 years. Modern survival experts are returning to these methods because they work without electricity, without refrigeration, and with materials you can find almost anywhere. In a survival situation, knowing how to properly salt cure meat could mean the difference between life and death during a harsh winter. Speaking of smoking, medieval people turned this into an art form that we've largely forgotten. They didn't just throw meat over any fire. They were incredibly selective about their wood choices, and each type of wood served a specific purpose. Oak was the gold standard for long-term preservation. Apple wood added subtle flavors and had natural antimicrobial properties. Beech wood was used for fish because it produced a clean, mild smoke that didn't overpower delicate flavors. They even used different parts of the same tree, bark, leaves, and twigs, each contributing different preservation qualities. The medieval smoking process was meticulous. They would build special smokehouses with precise ventilation systems. The temperature had to be just right. Too hot and you'd cook the meat instead of preserving it. Too cool and harmful bacteria could survive. They maintained these fires for days, sometimes weeks, creating a hostile environment for spoilage while infusing the meat with preservative compounds. But here's the forgotten wisdom. They understood that smoke contains natural chemicals like formaldehyde and phenols that actively fight bacteria. Modern science has proven what medieval people knew through experience. Certain wood smoke can preserve food for months without any other preservation method. Medieval people were absolute masters of dehydration, and their techniques were far more sophisticated than anything we do today. They didn't just leave meat out to dry. They created controlled environments that remove moisture while preventing spoilage. They built special drying rooms with specific airflow patterns. They knew that air needed to circulate constantly, but not too quickly, or the outside would form a hard shell while the inside remained moist and prone to rot. They positioned their drying racks at specific angles to maximize air exposure while protecting from direct sunlight, which could spoil the meat. For vegetables and fruits, they had an entire system. Root vegetables were stored in underground cellars with precise humidity control. They used layers of sand, straw, and even specific types of clay to create the perfect environment. Apples could be stored fresh for 6 to 8 months using these techniques. They also created what we now call jerky, But their version was far superior to anything you can buy today. They would slice meat with the grain, not against it, creating strips that were incredibly durable and could last for years. They understood that fat was the enemy of preservation, so they carefully removed every trace of it before drying. The fascinating part is that they could do all of this without any modern equipment. No dehydrators, no controlled temperature environments, no fancy vacuum sealers. Just knowledge, patience, and techniques passed down through generations. Here's where medieval survival techniques get really interesting. Fermentation. While we think of fermentation as trendy, medieval people used it as a survival necessity. They turned potentially spoiling food into food that would last longer and was actually more nutritious than when it started. Sauerkraut wasn't just a German delicacy, it was a survival food. Medieval people could take cabbage that would rot in days and turn it into a food that would last months and prevent scurvy. They filled entire barrels with fermented vegetables that would sustain them through the harshest winters. But they didn't stop at vegetables. They fermented dairy products, creating cheeses that could last for years. They fermented grains, creating alcoholic beverages that were safer to drink than water and provided essential calories. They even fermented meat, creating products like medieval salami that could hang in a cellar for months without spoiling. The key was understanding the science, even if they didn't know why it worked. They knew that certain bacteria were good bacteria, and they created environments where these beneficial microorganisms could thrive while harmful ones couldn't survive. They controlled pH levels, salt content, and temperature to create the perfect fermentation environment. Modern survival experts are rediscovering these techniques because they work without refrigeration, without preservatives, and actually improve the nutritional value of food. In a long-term survival situation, knowing how to ferment food could be the difference between thriving and barely surviving. Medieval people didn't just preserve individual foods, they created entire systems for surviving winter. They understood that survival wasn't just about having enough food, but about having the right kinds of food to maintain health and energy through the coldest months. They planned their entire year around autumn preservation. Animals were slaughtered in a specific order. First, the animals that wouldn't survive winter anyway, then those that required the most feed. Nothing was wasted. Organ meats were preserved first because they spoiled fastest. Blood was made into sausages. Even bones were processed into gelatin and stored. They created what we might call balanced survival nutrition. They made sure to preserve foods high in vitamin C to prevent scurvy, foods high in fat for energy and warmth, and foods high in protein for strength. They understood that surviving winter wasn't just about calories. It was about maintaining health. Their storage systems were incredibly sophisticated. They built multiple types of storage areas: dry cellars for grains, cool wet cellars for root vegetables, smokehouses for meats, and special rooms for fermented foods. Each had specific temperature and humidity requirements, and they monitored these carefully. But here's what's truly remarkable. They could predict and prepare for famines. They maintained emergency food stores that could last for years. Some medieval monasteries and castles had food stores that could sustain their entire population for 2 to 3 years without any fresh food coming in. Medieval people didn't just preserve food, they preserved medicine. They created natural pharmacies that could treat everything from minor cuts to serious illnesses, all using plants and techniques that modern medicine is rediscovering. They knew which plants had antimicrobial properties and used them to treat infections. Honey wasn't just food, it was medicine. They understood that honey never spoils and has natural antibiotic properties. They created honey-based treatments for wounds that were actually more effective than many modern treatments. They dried and preserved herbs in ways that maintained their medicinal properties for years. They created tinctures, salves, and powders that could treat common ailments. They even understood the concept of dosage. They knew that the difference between medicine and poison was often just the amount used. Willow bark for pain relief, garlic for infections, elderberry for immune support. These weren't folk remedies. They were sophisticated medical treatments that worked. Modern pharmaceutical companies are still discovering compounds in these traditional medicines. So why should we care about these forgotten medieval survival techniques? Because they work. They work without electricity, without modern technology, and without expensive equipment. They work in disaster situations, in remote locations, and in long-term survival scenarios. These techniques kept entire civilizations alive for centuries. They turned potential famine into abundance, winter into just another season, and transformed simple ingredients into complex survival systems that could sustain life indefinitely. The next time you're in a survival situation, remember the medieval masters who perfected these techniques. The next time the power goes out, remember that people survived and thrived for thousands of years without it. The next time you want to be more self-sufficient, remember that our ancestors were the ultimate preppers. These forgotten techniques aren't just historical curiosities. They're life skills that could save your life. And the best part? You can start practicing them today with ingredients you probably already have in your kitchen. What medieval survival technique surprised you the most? Have you ever tried any of these preservation methods? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to learn more about history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. I hope you enjoyed this peaceful journey through medieval survival. And if you somehow managed to stay awake through all of that life or death drama, well, maybe history isn't quite as sleepy as we thought. Until next time, sweet dreams. And remember, our ancestors' nightmares might just save your life.